I am in the heart of Andalusia, the place in which 1,000 and a little more years ago was unleashed on an unexpected Europe. The anxieties and concerns of new machines, new technologies that still rattle around our minds today. And at the same time came the ideas spreading from the East into Western Europe, with which people tried to grapple with what was unfolding, and which I think can illuminate what's unfolding now still. This is the place in which the Islamic Empire landed in Western Europe in 711, when Tariq landed on Jebel Tariq, Gibraltar, and brought a new way of thinking, an old way of engaging with the life of humanity, the cosmos, the gods. They brought the new Islamic ideas that had been so productively engaging with the thought of the ancient world, particularly of Aristotle. And at the same time, within a few generations, came the technologies of the Islamic world. And three in particular caused as much worry as they did hope about how they might change life: windmills, clocks, and astrolabes. Windmills have been known for millennia even. They're known in antiquity. But what Islamic engineering had achieved was converting windmills into vertical structures, as we think of them today, so that through cogs and machinery, useful tasks might be done, from grinding corn to pressing olives. But at the same time, the creation of these new windmills deeply disturbed the minds of the still medieval world. What a windmill could do was separate what previously had been thought to be aspects of the one phenomenon and part of life. It's caught in ancient languages, Sanskrit, Hebrew, Greek, others, where there's the one word for what we now think of as three different things: wind, breath, and spirit. So, for example, when Plato writes about pneuma, he describes how the pneuma, the wind that's around us, becomes the pneuma, the breath that we take in, that becomes the spirit, the pneuma that is part of our life. And then as we breathe out, this same pneuma, spirit, is transformed into another aspect, pneuma, breath, and then returns to pneuma, wind. And so there's a great participation in the life of pneuma that we experience. But what windmills achieved was a stripping out, a disconnection of one aspect of pneuma, wind, and converting it into mechanical power to do useful things. But at the same time, leaving a sense that perhaps we human beings were becoming uncoupled from our breath, uncoupled from the spirit of the world around us. And so it was a technology that at once inspired and provoked anxiety because of what it was doing to our sense of what it was to be human. Was this technology as much devilish as if sent from the gods? Another technology achieved a similar kind of thing, but attacking another aspect of our felt sense of what it was to be alive, and this were clocks. Again, clocks have been known in antiquity. You can still see the great water clock in the Agora of Athens. But the technology was improving, it was becoming cheaper, another achievement of the Islamic period. And that meant that they were more directly, more frequently, more imminently affecting life. And whilst for the good, also with a sense of disquiet, because chronos time was becoming more present in people's lives, measuring the day by equal divides that were determined not by nature, not by the cosmos, but by human engineering. And that led people to wonder what was being lost. The kairos time of the present moment, the way that the day was set by the rising of that great divine presence, the sun, and then its setting, the dividing of the day according to the pulses of the seasons, the experience of living beneath a living cosmos, that was being undone by the spread of clocks. And so a similar anxiety was provoked, was introduced into Western Europe from the glories of the Islamic Empire. And then think of Astrolabes, another technology that improved and spread through the Iberian Peninsula with the birth of Islam in Spain. Astrolabes too, that had once been as much spiritual devices, connecting the human mind with the heavens in another way, enabling a participation of our thought and perception with the divine thought and perception represented in the stars. But as the technology gets better, it raises new questions. Is the astrolabe, the mechanical device, more accurate than the spiritual sense that people had turned to quite spontaneously previously? What as well did that mean of the sense of eternity in the present moment, of the sense of our minds participating with the divine mind? Might the astrolabe, alongside the clock, alongside the windmill, actually be uncoupling us from our sense of vitality and life and spirit, as much as serving us and improving lives therefore? The stars with which we once considered, that informed our desires, had influence, all those words relating to astrology, the inflow, the sense of contemplating the present moment with the stars, all that was being called into question. Philosophers started asking questions about essence and existence. Were these two things that in Aristotle had been coterminous, that we are beings dwelling in the divine being, had been thought to be self-evidently true, but now some philosophers started asking, maybe our existence is prior to our essence. The fact of our being beings is more important than the being of which we're manifestations, leading to worries about whether the human mind was a reflection, a fitting in the divine mind. Perhaps our minds were becoming disconnected from the world around us, eventually becoming experienced as wholly private, as if my thoughts are my own thoughts, not the thoughts of presences of the divine mind flowing through me. And as these technologies became more evident in life, people turned to broadly three ways of trying to hold the anxiety, understand what was going on, and maintain the sense of broader connection and participation. A religious way, a philosophical way, and a spiritual way. The spiritual way here in Andalusia was supremely exemplified in the figure of Ibn Arabi, born in Murcia, growing up in Seville, eventually leaving Spain, travelling east and dying and being buried in Damascus. But Ibn Arabi, being recovered more in the West now, being understood better, is a huge figure, particularly in Islam, influenced by Sufi thought and practice. I think I'll be doing another talk on Ibn Arabi, such as the richness of his ideas. But he lived in a world, the al-Muradi empire, that was at once very interested in philosophy and what it could do for religion, but at once was puritanical and reformist as well. And that sense of religiosity was in part a response to these technological changes, which are all also different experiences of consciousness. And so the religious option presented itself to people as well. The way of rituals that might secure your relation to the seasons and to the world. The way that dogma might tell you of your links with the wider world. giving you a social world of belonging as well, when perhaps the connection with the land and the seasons was feeling less secure. And an ethic too, another great form of religious conviction that would tell you how to behave, when perhaps a more intuitive, imaginative way of engaging with the stars, with the hills, with the trees, with the fields, with the animals, with others, felt less secure. And so you have in European Islamic traditions, as much as in other traditions and indeed in the Christian traditions that they so powerfully influenced, great religious anxieties as expressions of the anxiety of the technologically driven change too. But also you have the philosophers, the great philosophers of the Islamic age, sometimes a tradition that's said to have started with al-Kindi, who was the first, it's said, to have brought alongside the great revelations of the Quran with that of the first teacher, Aristotle. And he initiated a tradition that was taken up by al-Farabi, who was in charge of the great translation exercises in the Abbasid Empire from Baghdad. But here in Andalusia, that meant that there was both a great feeding of ideas from the broader Islamic empire, but also a sense of distance from the centre of that. And you had, as a result, the establishment of the Caliphate based in Cordoba, and that was the hometown of what was going to be the birthplace of the great figures of Averroes and Ibn Arabi, Maimonides, figures who lived actually a little later after the golden age of Cordoba, and in a time, again, of disruption as much as mutuality, of disquiet as much as connection. But focusing on the figure of Averroes Ibn Rushd is very interesting, because in a way he constellates a lot of wrestling with the controversies of the age, which were about this sense of what it was to be human, what was happening in the advances, technologically speaking, that had these ripple out effects on the sense of what it was to be a spiritual being as well. And I think three controversies can highlight challenges and problems that we're still wrestling with today. One is what's sometimes referred to as occasionalism. Another great philosopher of the Islamic world, Al-Ghazali, author of the famous book, The Incoherence of the Philosophers. In a way, he's the philosopher of the Islamic world. Al-Ghazali had argued the strongest form of occasionalism, which is that every moment our being is dependent upon an outflow and emanation of the divine being. And so we rely for our present moment on the eternal presence of God. And that was questioned by these new technologies. If you think about it, a clock, chronos time, that seems to be self-moving, self-perpetuating, the fall of the water, the rocking of the pendulum. That uncouples the present moment from the eternal divine moment, it seems. And so clocks were deeply disturbing to people. But what Averroes said in response was that there's more than one cause. And he turned to Aristotle and argued that Aristotle's notion of four causes can help us here, because at any one moment there's more than one kind of connection that's linking us to the world around us. Cause back then meaning not so much cause and effect as a relationship, a living, dynamic connection that was described, Aristotle said, in four ways. There was the material cause, the fact of our physical existence, that clearly plays a part. There's the efficient cause, the energy, the dynamism, the soul that fills material existence. That too is important. But then there's the formal cause, the regularities, the habits, the laws even, that shape these relationships, this mode of participating, that must be described too, as must supremely the final cause, the purpose, the good to which the material, the efficient and the formal cause all tends. And Averroes therefore said that, look, these new technologies, the clocks, the astrolabes, the windmills, they can be understood as amplifying the material and efficient causation that is part of our dwelling in the world, and putting that to, therefore, material and efficient use. But still, they are dwelling in a world shaped by the formal cause that belongs to God, and the efficient cause, which is the good of our lives, the good of the divine within us as well. And I think that we still wrestle with this sense of what's causing what. Are we becoming uncoupled? When we try to understand the impact of technology now, it's very natural, 1,000 years almost later, to think wholly of the mechanical and the efficient, as if the world is not just ruled by clockwork, but is best described as if it's clockwork. But as David Hume, the Scottish skeptic of the Enlightenment, pointed out, the links in mechanical chains of cause and effect are really inferred by us. We don't observe the power that links one to the other. And although David Hume didn't turn to Aristotle to fill that gap, it's precisely what the formal cause and the final cause offer, because the formal cause is that relationship of sympathy, of resonance, of harmony that holds the world together, and the final cause is that which shapes the resonance, sympathy and harmony and gives it a place within the divine dwelling, within the divine expression of what's good, beautiful and true in our lives. And that creates some space. We needn't be so trapped by the sense that the mechanical is ruling all, as if efficiency is the main guide in life. No, there's always the question of what is the wider set of relationships that's holding things together, and what do those wider sets of relationships tend towards? Are they towards that which is good, that which is beautiful, that which is true? And it seems to me that's one of the questions that philosophers like Averroes were asking in the 12th, 13th century here in Andalusia, and we still need to keep asking now, because then we might recall the richer sense of our humanity and how the technologies don't just lead us, but we can lead them as well. Another facet of mutual participation. A second great issue that was discussed by the Islamic philosophers was that of the eternity of the cosmos. Was the world made at some point, or has it always dwelt, had it always existed? Aristotle told figures like Avicenna, figures like Averroes, that the cosmos was eternal. It was effectively infinite in extent. And at one level, a slightly simplistic level, Aristotle pointed out that there can't really be a first piece of matter, because matter always depends on other elements of matter as well. Something can't come from nothing, as he worried about when he thought about the pre-Socratics like Parmenides. Similarly, movement always depends upon a prior movement as well, so he argued the universe that's always in movement must be therefore infinite in extent as well. But when this came into Islamic and Christian thought too, that was questioned, because there was a sense in which the world had been made. In the beginning, God created the world. The Hebrew Bible would have told people like Thomas Aquinas, people like Avicenna. And so they engaged with Aristotle in a slightly different way. And the commentator, Averroes, told Thomas Aquinas that the philosopher Aristotle, as Thomas Aquinas referred to Aristotle, that what this was about was a slightly more subtle relationship between eternity and time. It's that every moment of time is itself born from eternity. As Plato had put it, time is the moving image of eternity. And as Aristotle has expressed that, this is the sense that what is actual is born from that which is potential, and that which is potential is held in eternity, in the mind of God, born moment by moment in its actuality, that is the world around us that we know tangibly, we know materially, but the soul, the spirit, is always fully present in that materiality as it's born moment by moment. Eternity and time are not uncoupling with the emergence of things like chronological clocks, with the development of technologies like windmills that run cog turning on cog as if like a clock. We can rethink that relationship again and learn to experience time once more as the continual outpouring of eternity, so that every moment can be experienced as fresh and as new and as unique. The power of now. We know ourselves to be part of a historical outpouring into a future, that aspect of time too, but at the same time as the horizontal, there's the vertical experience of time. And the great Islamic philosophers, in their disputing over these questions, sought to instill that once more into the minds of their fellows in the 12th and 13th century. And it seems to me that that is a wonderful meditation to have now too, as we worry about our place in the cosmos and worry about how our minds fit the mind of God or the mind of the machine that seems to be born around us. And there's a third great controversy that relates to that as well. It's sometimes referred to as the question of a unified intelligence. When you and I think and speak and imagine, are we doing that as isolated entities, as if these things are born within us alone? Or do we think and imagine and speak because we're part of the divine words, the divine mind, the divine intelligence? And in fact, when we speak freely, which is to say, when we speak most fully, most beautifully, yearning to describe that which is true, is that itself a spiritual exercise because we're drawing down from the divine mind in our words? This was questioned by the Islamic philosophers as they felt life to be changing with the success of their empire and the technologies which were therefore born, even as now the assumption is we do think, we do imagine privately, as if these things come out of us rather than flow into us, and we participate, co-create with them. Averroes was inclined to say that when we speak well, we are joined with the One, we're joined with God. That links us back to the sharing of the many things with the One, this great Islamic doctrine of the unity of being. Thomas Aquinas had a slightly different inflection. He was more conscious of the role of the individual in Christianity, the need to assent as a person to the divine person of Christ. And so he felt that whilst we do, when we speak truly, join with the mind of God, we can also speak falsely, and then we become uncoupled from the mind of God, and even perhaps our eternal destiny might be put into jeopardy. So hence the importance of using our freedom well to participate in the fullness of life, rather than to cultivate the vices that might lead us away from the divine life. But once again, what was happening in this place these hundreds of years ago still feels very relevant to the questions which we ask ourselves now. It's come to be called the challenge of nominalism, which it's sometimes said is at the root of the meaning crisis. Nominalism referring to the Latin for names, as if when we speak and call things by a name, it's merely an arbitrary sign that we give it for our convenience, for our use, rather than the name itself carrying the spirit and the soul of that which is named, and so the name becoming a sacred way of connecting that which exists back to the source of its existence. And to my mind, this is all to ask, what is our intelligence? What is our awareness? And it only really fully makes sense to think of our intelligence as a participation with a wider intelligence that's around us. As the Islamic tradition so beautifully puts it, things share in the names of God. The plants around me share in the name of God that is beautiful, that is generous. But we human beings share in other names of God as well. We can know the name of God that is the real, and remembering in a beautiful place the depth, the extent, the richness of our existence as a participation in the divine being, and thinking about the nature of intelligence, the experience of it, the presence of it in our lives, in a beautiful place that also shares in the intelligence, the unfolding of the divine life, is a wonderful meditation, something to draw on, a resource distilled by the great Islamic philosophers like Averroes, fed into the life of Western Christianity through figures like Thomas Aquinas, reflected upon in the Renaissance, used again in the Enlightenment period, and inviting us to contemplate once more as new technologies raise the same questions again about our understanding of ourselves. The anxiety of the mechanical world is not a new one, it's an old one. And in that tradition can be found ways of living fully in our now, not driven by fear and anxiety, or conversely, a strange optimism in the future of technology and the machine, but understanding its place in the divine economy, knowing that we human beings have the capacities to articulate, to experience, and to dwell in that now as much as then.